Dragmore, Kenna, Bridge Spirits. This will probably be the last episode for today, I think. Or for this morning. I should be able to record some tonight, right? Yeah. Yeah, I think. Yeah, because after this will be... And maybe we could do one more. We'll see. However, I do also want to rewatch my Kingdom Hearts videos for some reason. Let's do that too. We're back with a new video. In this video, I'll be talking about my experience with Kingdom Hearts HD 1.5 plus 2.5 Remix. So let's get this out of the way. So I have there will be spoilers for every single game in the collection, which includes Kingdom Hearts 1, Rechain of Memories, 358 over 2 days, Kingdom Hearts 2, Birth by Sleep, and Recoded. So if you don't want to get spoiled, don't watch this video. So for my prior experience with Kingdom Hearts is a series I've always wanted to get into, I just never could. I played Kingdom Hearts 1 for the first time back in I think 2011 on the PS2, and while I did play about half of the game, I never really connected to it. I bought this collection on Black Friday of 2017, and gave Kingdom Hearts 1 a shot once again, and still didn't really care for it. I stopped playing the game after Wonderland, I died twice at the boss at the end of the level, and just decided, I don't really care enough. And then we jump forward to 2019, right now, where Kingdom Hearts 3 was about to come out, and I decided, let's give it another shot. Let's finally give Kingdom Hearts another shot. And this time it went slightly better, but not perfectly. So obviously here we're starting with Kingdom Hearts 1, that was the first game I played, obviously. And this time I was able to play most of the game. But even though I did play most of the game, I still have an overall mixed opinion on it. From a gameplay perspective, it was fine. The camera's pretty bad. The platforming's pretty abysmal. The RPG elements are pretty standard, especially for a game for 2002. Combat is your standard hack and slash fare, especially in this first game where I don't feel like they add enough skills to really differentiate itself. I mean, the graphics on this remaster are pretty good, and that goes throughout the entire collection. Especially for this game, considering it came out in 2002. The soundtrack is incredible as it is again for all the games in the series. And I hate the gummy missions. The gummy missions suck. Obviously, they're pretty much just rail shooters, but they're so boring. And they're not difficult at all in this first game. They just feel like a whole bunch of wasted time. The Disney World's obviously the big appeal to this game. I feel like there's some good ones, there's some bad ones. I really like Deep Jungle, I like Agrabah, but I really hate Atlantica, I didn't like Monstro. But something I did really like about these worlds in general is the fact that they all felt different. They all played differently. And I think this really emphasizes something that the entire series of Kingdom Hearts does, which is does the smaller details very, very well. But further, I feel like they have some pretty faulty bigger gameplay elements that you would think a game of this scale and this budget would have, but for some reason they don't. Now let's talk about the narrative, which I think is also pretty solid. I think this first game's narrative is pretty focused. It's a pretty good setup for the rest of the series. Oh, is it
the actual stories in
there?
Disney worlds are kind of pointless and really just there to add Disney properties to the games. And that's how I feel about them in every game. I feel like the actual stories within these Disney worlds never really matter. But in this game, at least there's a purpose for doing them. Sora is obviously searching for Kairi and Riku, while Donald and Goofy are searching for Mickey. But to be honest though, I never really love these characters from Kingdom Hearts. The original characters here, a lot of them just feel like standard anime characters. Really cheesy dialogue, and the theme of friendships is super blatant. Now, I was saving this for last, so we're gonna talk about now, the boss battles. They're such a major part in the Kingdom Hearts franchise, and to be honest, in this first game, they're so difficult. So difficult to where I didn't finish the game. I did get to the very, very end of the game. I got to the Ansem fight, but I died over and over and over again. I literally did this boss battle for around an hour and a half to 2 hours. And I just said, screw it, I was watching it online. It's such a ridiculous boss battle. It has so many different stages. With this boss battle having a really ridiculous checkpoint system, it's really just such a pain to play. That and also the fact that I was severely under level. I think I was level 48. You're supposed to be at least level 50 by the time you get to the end of the world, which is the final world in the game. And I would die at this Ansem fight after only 2 hits. I actually did start to do some grinding and kind of realize that just to level up a few levels, it would take hours. It takes forever to level up in this game. And to be honest, at this point in the series, I wasn't really an enormous fan. It was okay, but it wasn't something I really wanted to go out of my way to finish. The entire endgame, though, is just so ridiculous and tedious, starting from the Hollow Bastion point, where it's just a really annoying dungeon that takes a few hours to get through, and there's a whole bunch of tough boss battles within it, and then it's directly followed by the end of the world, which is again another 2 hours straight of non-stop fighting, numerous boss battles, again the terrible checkpoints. It's so bad, it's not fun. So overall, while I didn't finish Kingdom Hearts 1, I was definitely intrigued by the narrative enough to continue on to the other games, so I did move on to Rechain of Memories immediately after I watched the ending. Now we're getting to Rechain of Memories, which was another pretty interesting experience. It's so weird, the fact that this was originally a Game Boy Advance game that was remade for the PS2, and I gotta say, I liked the game for the first half, but we'll get to that a bit later. Now from what I understand, most people dislike this game, mostly because of its combat system, which I gotta say, I actually like. The combat system is real-time and card-based, which are two things that normally don't go together. I thought this added an interesting strategy to the game, where you need higher power cards to overpower your opponent's attacks, and you gotta know when the right time to use your cards will be. The combat itself is pretty similar to the other Kingdom Hearts games, it's just you need cards to activate any type of attack or magic that you use. Now this also adds an annoying bit to the game where your opponent can activate a higher level card to block your attack, meaning that you waste cards. Considering every single time you run out of cards and reload, you get less cards each time. The game itself uses a lot of assets from Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2. You can tell it's a remake with very minimal voice acting, and this being a smaller game comprises smaller rooms, isolated rooms for combat, and a similar structure throughout the game where in each world you'll find 3 key cards that each progress the story. The narrative of the game is interesting as it was made to bridge the gap between Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, introducing a lot of characters that show up in Kingdom Hearts 2 and explaining why Sora has to start all over again at the beginning of the game. I did enjoy the narrative as expanded on the series' lore, but I do feel like the game and the narrative both get pretty repetitive. As I said, you have to do the same thing every single time in every single world, and in between worlds there's a cutscene or boss battle that plays out, and then this is followed by, after you finish the main game, there's another playthrough where you play as Riku, and you do the exact same thing over and over again, just with a different story. I just find the Riku storyline kind of boring and for the most part pointless. There are a couple things that are important, but for the most part I didn't feel like it really needed to be in the game. So I should mention this now. Like Kingdom Hearts 1, I did not finish Rechain of Memories. I found the first half of the Sora playthrough pretty fun. I was actually enjoying myself until I got to the Vexen fight. I literally played this boss battle over and over and over again for 3 hours. And what was frustrating here is that this wasn't like the Ansem fight in Kingdom Hearts 1 where I never made any real progress. Here in the Vexen fight, I knew I could do it. I know I can do it. I did it so many times. I got so close to finishing them off numerous times. I would always just mess it up at the very, very end. So I just quit. The problem here was the fact that I didn't have strong enough cards. And with the way this game is structured, to grind, you need to stay within that world, or else you need to start the entire world again. But then again, I mean, in this world, the Vexen fight automatically activates once you leave the world, so I was completely screwed. So yeah, I watched the rest of the cutscenes online. As I said, I did enjoy the Sora narrative, but I did feel like the Riku narrative was pretty slow. Again, I was really enjoying Rechain of Memories, potentially more than I even enjoyed KH1. But with me not making it anywhere close to the end, I just feel like this is such a massive disappointment for me. Now, we're gonna shake up the order a little bit with these next things. 358 over 2 days is actually the next game in the collection. However, I did play Kingdom Hearts 2 first, so we'll be talking about Kingdom Hearts 2 first here. And that is the way I would recommend you experience this anyway. While 358 over 2 days is a prequel prequel to 2, Kingdom Hearts 2 was meant to be experienced first, considering 1 came out first, and 2, it definitely leaves a lot of intrigue there that you wouldn't have if you watched 358 over 2 days first. So when comparing Kingdom Hearts 1 to 2, I feel like the gameplay 2 is obviously improved in almost every single way. The combat is more refined. I did like the drive forms here, even though I didn't really use them very much. I really only used them as a last-second measure. That being said, what is annoying about this game is that dodging is very difficult. The fact that an actual dodge roll or anything isn't in this game outside of one of these drive forms is a really annoying gameplay element. The gunship missions are improved with more dynamic paths, but to be honest, I still didn't really care for it. I still found most of them pretty boring. Something I hated in this game, though, was the abundance of minigames and quick-time events. And I just felt like they were annoying, weren't really well done, and also they were spread throughout the entire game. The boss battles here seem grander, more imaginative, and to be honest, much easier. To be honest, the difficulty of the game in general is much easier, with there only being one boss battle that I had any real difficulty with that being the Roxas battle, that wasn't even included in the original version of the game. So this is actually the first game I did finish. The entire game is on a much bigger scale, with larger Disney worlds, and there being some really unexpected ones for me, like Pirates of the Caribbean, Steamboat Willie, and Tron. I mean, like, who thought there was gonna be a Tron world in Kingdom Hearts? But what I did find annoying is that in the first half of the game, you go to all these worlds, then you go to Hollow Bastion, some major events happen there, and after that, you have to go back to each of these worlds and do another storyline. And really, I didn't feel like there was any real narrative reason for this either. Obviously, they come up with an excuse, but it didn't really feel like a necessary thing. I might as well talk about the narrative now, and I'm pretty mixed on it. Where I felt like Kingdom Hearts 1 was a very focused, good introduction to the series, Kingdom Hearts 2 was just all over the place. I hated the beginning where it played as Roxas. The fact that was pretty much just a 3-hour tutorial is really annoying and just could have been easily cut down. Again, Disney Worlds had no real narrative reason for them, like the other Kingdom Hearts games. They're kind of just there just to have Disney properties. Outside of Disney Worlds, I really love the middle section and Hollow Bastion. I really love the world that never was. Those being the two major points in the game that the most narrative stuff happens. However, just like the underworld in Kingdom Hearts 1, I do feel like the ending section here went on for way too long, with you having to beat Xemnas like a billion times before he finally stays dead. I also feel like some of the plot lines here were pretty blatant retcons. Now, they make sense within the world, but stuff like Ansem from KH1 not being the real Ansem, and now there being multiple Ansems and multiple Xehanorts, it's like, come on, that was not the original plan. So overall, I enjoyed Kingdom Hearts 2 more than Kingdom Hearts 1. It's probably my favorite game in the series I've played so far, but it's not perfect. It's definitely pretty messy in terms of its narrative, and also has some dumb game mechanics. Now let's move on to the 2 movies, which I did watch after starting Birth by Sleep. I finished them before I finished Birth by Sleep, so yeah, we're just gonna talk about them here. So I watched 358 over 2 days first, and while I hated the Roxas sections in Kingdom Hearts 2, I love 358 over 2 days. If you don't know, this was originally a DS game, and instead of remaking the game for PS4, they decided to make it a movie instead. And I thought it was a near perfect prequel to Kingdom Hearts 2, filling in a lot of the gaps in that story without contradicting anything previously. And telling a really compelling narrative at that, telling the story of Roxas, Xion, and Axel, and they actually made me care about this trio. And as I said, that's one of my biggest complaints of Kingdom Hearts, is the fact that I never really cared about any of these characters. Yet Sora, Riku, and Kairi feel pretty generic to me. But I feel like 358 over 2 days tackled some really interesting themes, and made me really like this trio. And making Roxas and Axel 2 characters who I really didn't care for in Kingdom Hearts 2. Probably 2 of my favorite characters in the entire series at this point. Now for the other movie, which is Recoded, and I have the complete opposite opinion of Recoded here. Recoded sucks. Again, this is another movie made of cutscenes from a DS game that was actually already a remake of a mobile game. It's easily the worst thing in this collection, with 99% of this movie being completely pointless. Literally nothing important happens until the very, very end, which does tie in the characters of 358 over 2 days and Birth by Sleep into the current narrative. It also sets up the events of Dream Drop Distance, but that's literally like the last 10 minutes of a 3-hour movie. And the rest of the scenes throughout the movie are pretty much just retellings of like events that happened in Kingdom Hearts 1 and Kingdom Hearts 2. It's so bad. So finally, we're going to talk about Birth by Sleep here, which is a game I actually liked, but I have very mixed opinions of. From a gameplay perspective, I think it's a mix of Reaching Memories and Kingdom Hearts 2, with the combat playing out pretty similarly to Kingdom Hearts 2, but there is a deck system that you use for your magic and stronger physical attacks. The camera here is pretty bad. Now, while the camera is pretty mediocre throughout the entire series, it's very, very bad in this game. I think a lot of that coming from the fact that, again, this was originally a PSP game, so it still has like the faulty camera from being on that console. Now, for the most part here, the Disney worlds are pretty bad in my opinion. There's places like Enchanted Dominion and Castle Dreams I thought were pretty boring, but I did like Deep Space, so at least there's that. Now, the way you finish this game is that you have to complete the game 3 times using all 3 characters. While you do go to the same worlds in each of these playthroughs, the experience is completely different for each character, with each storyline occurring at different times, and with each character specializing in a different combat, with Taro being more physical, Ventus being quicker, and Aqua having more magic. Now, this game, for the most part, is fairly easy, until you reach the Keyblade Graveyard. I never really had much difficulty before that, and the Aqua playthrough is definitely probably the toughest one for me, considering I'm usually more of an offensive sort of player, and Aqua uses a lot more magic. It also has a shorter range for her attacks, but the difficulty here really spikes at Keyblade Graveyard, with the final battle being brutal, especially the Vanitas fight, when you're playing as Ventus, where I was literally stuck on this boss battle for about 2 hours. And to be honest, a lot of that just means the fact that I didn't know what we were supposed to do at the very end of the boss battle. Obviously, I eventually figured it out, but considering the final battle was like a 2-phase battle, and I would always get to that second phase, but every single time you die, you have to go back to the first phase, that just frustrated the hell out of me. Now, from a narrative standpoint, I do like what this game does for the most part. I think this is a pretty great prequel to the rest of the series, introducing characters that become a major factor in games like Kingdom Hearts 3, and introducing us to the main antagonist of the series up to this point, Xehanort. The narrative does get a bit repetitive, especially after doing the 3 playthroughs, as there are certain plot points that are the exact same, but just from a different perspective. Now, for the characters themselves, I think that they're pretty standard Kingdom Hearts characters. Terra is a pretty generic Anakin Skywalker-esque character, where he's like a good guy that's struggling with darkness. Ventus is pretty much just another version of Sora. I do find him pretty annoying. Aqua, I feel like, is the most interesting of the bunch, but she's kind of just fine. Something I do like about this game, though, is how these characters connect to future games. As you can tell, there were some elements in Reaching Memories and Kingdom Hearts 2 that were set up with this game already in mind. Now, I did complain about Kingdom Hearts 2 having retcon, but I do believe after Kingdom Hearts 1, I do think from Reaching Memories on, there was a solid plan, and I feel like Nomura has pretty much executed it. Obviously, there are changes to the plan, but when is it there? Now, when it comes to the true ending of Birth by Sleep, I gotta be honest here, I did not do it. And the reason for it is I completed all 3 storylines. I completed the Terra storyline, the Ventus storyline, and the Aqua storyline, and then realized afterwards they need to collect all the Xehanort reports to unlock the final ending. And I didn't know this at the time of playing, so I researched on how to get them, how to unlock this final ending. And to do that, I would have to replay the ending of those sequences, but collect the Xehanort reports along the way. There's no way I'm replaying that. I'm not replaying that. I'm done. To be honest, at this point where I'm at, where I finished Kingdom Hearts 2, I watched the 2 movies, and I slogged through Birth by Sleep, I'm done. I'm just gonna watch it online. I don't care. So at the end of the day, that means I only finished 1 actual Kingdom Hearts game in Kingdom Hearts 2. However, again, I got to the very end of Birth by Sleep and Kingdom Hearts 1. I'll reach out memories, I didn't come close. But despite not finishing these games, I still still enjoyed them to a degree. I'm still intrigued by the narrative. I like the world building. I like the way that Nomura has planned out his story from at least the time of Chain of Memories. So at some point, I would like to continue on and play the future games. So there you go. That was my entire experience with Kingdom Hearts 1.5 plus 2.5. That took me about 2 months to finish, considering I did take a 1 month break between Chain of Memories and 2. Kind of to cool myself down after the frustration I had with Chain of Memories. So yeah, I do think I'll probably potentially do another video like this when I get around to playing 2.8 and 3, which will probably be way down the road, considering I think I've had enough Kingdom Hearts for right now. So there you go. That's my thoughts on the Kingdom Hearts series so far. So yeah, thank you for watching.
Okay.
Alright guys, BLM here, and we're back with another video. In this video, we'll be going over my thoughts on the recently released Assassin's Creed 3 Remastered. Originally, I was going to do a full-blown review of this game, but I do plan on doing a video where I rank all the main series Assassin's Creed games, so I thought it would just be kind of repetitive to talk about AC3 in general twice. So this video will more so focus on the actual remaster itself than the base game. Now, this remaster includes both AC3 and Liberation, and while I will talk about Liberation a little bit at the end, this video will mostly focus on AC3. But AC3, let's first talk about the graphics, which while in the open world, they look pretty good. The world is pretty colorful, a lot more so than the original game, which had a pretty dull color palette. This makes the cities feel more alive and more vibrant than in the original game, but it doesn't fix everything. There's still some pretty big problems with the game's level design, which makes you spend most of your time in the streets instead of free running or going on the roofs. Now, the graphics on the character models here are pretty bad. The faces in this game are so strange. They're made to look more plasticky. Now, I think a lot of the problems here come from the new lighting system. A lot of what makes the open world look so great is the fact that the lighting is so much better. However, I think at the same time, that lighting system also shows all the flaws in these character models. And again, it makes a lot of characters look ridiculous, especially Haytham. I think Haytham is the one that looks the worst. But there are some character models that look okay. I mean, Charles Lee doesn't look that bad. For the most part, the character models here are pretty bad. But for me, it's not a deal breaker, but I know for a lot of other people it could be. Now, from a gameplay perspective, there are some minor improvements here. They added in low-profile double assassinations and the ability to whistle for more hiding spots, which really helps out the stealth of the game. Lockpicking now only takes one button press instead of mashing on the button, and also you can free aim your gun, so that's cool, I guess. There are also some minor changes to the missions throughout the game as well. For example, when you're looking for Miko in the Upper House in the first mission, when he tells you to use Eagle Vision for the first time, it automatically locks onto him in this remaster. However, in the original version, you'd have to actually search for him, which sometimes glitched out. Another example is during the ship missions at the end of Sequence 1, where originally at the end of each day, Haytham would have to return to his room. However, they removed that, making this a more streamlined experience. Another example would be the fight against Louis Mills, where before there was a glitch where you could counter kill him with one attack. Yet in this remaster, they fixed that to where now you have to actually do the full boss battle. And that's all in Sequence 1. There are more changes throughout the game. They're pretty cool touches, but at the end of the day, these aren't really changing anything too much. Another improvement here is the HUD. Thankfully, they made it a bit more colorful than the original version. The objective marker is now a bright yellow exclamation mark instead of what it used to be, which was a black and white exclamation mark. They also changed certain things about the minimap to make things stand out more. Enemies, now you can see where they're looking at, which helps you again with the stealth of the game. You can also tell whether they're on the ground or on the roof of the minimap. And they also added the button commands on the top right side of the screen, which wasn't pretty much every single older Assassin's Creed game, but for some reason was in 3, so they added it here. Overall, all these changes make the game feel a lot more like Black Flag. And to me, that's what it feels like they were going for, was trying to make the game feel a bit more like Black Flag, again with a lot of the HUD changes and a lot of the modifications in the gameplay. Now, with this game simply being a remaster, obviously they didn't change anything about the actual narrative, which was something I had a big issue with in the original game, and I still have it here, obviously. But I do feel like they could have added something that would have made the game a lot better, and that is Connor's Forsaken speech. That was originally recorded, and it's found in the original game files of the original game. If you don't know what this is a speech that was originally supposed to be an epilogue speech for Connor. It was also included at the end of the book Forsaken. And because the audio was originally recorded, I was hoping that they were going to add it as like a forced epilogue into this game, but they didn't. And I think it's a shame because the speech is really good, and it really includes Connor's character arc in a way that greatly improves the narrative. I feel like without that there, Connor's character development just is never actually shown. Now, obviously, through this collection, the DLCs are also included. Stuff like the Benedict Arnold missions, stuff like Tyranny King Washington. To be honest, I've never even played the Benedict Arnold missions, and I haven't played Tyranny King Washington in years, so I thought these were cool additions to the game. And now the final thing I'm going to talk about with AC3 here is the fact that they obviously added in new legacy outfits as well, which they're fine. I mean, to be honest, I never really cared about legacy outfits, but they're cool to have. So now for Liberation, which I'm not really going to talk about too much, and I haven't played much of Liberation as of right now, as of the time of this recording. This is kind of meant to be kind of more like a first impression sort of thing. But with Liberation, to be honest, there's not much to say for me. I mean, unlike AC3, which I played at least 15 times, I only played Liberation for myself one time in the past. And to be honest, I don't really like the game. So I mean, there are some pretty blatant graphical improvements and the same sort of modifications to the HUD like an AC3 remastered. But outside that, I don't notice any blatant changes. Yeah, for me, it's kind of hard to compare the two because I haven't played the original nearly as often. But I do feel like Liberation as a whole was kind of just included in this collection to sweeten the deal. The improvements that I saw were kind of the same improvements that were there from the AC3 remaster. So what I'm thinking probably happened is that they just copied over the code from the AC3 remaster into Liberation and just prayed that it worked. It doesn't seem like they actually put too much extra time into the Liberation remaster, and it was only there to really sweeten the deal. Now, the thing I want to talk about this collection in general is obviously I got this collection through the season pass of AC Odyssey. And it also came with AC3 remastered and all the story-based DLCs of Odyssey. And to be honest, I don't see why you would buy this remaster unless you also got the season pass. This remaster is actually the same price as the season pass at $40. So unless you want a physical copy of the game, I just don't see why you would buy it as a standalone. Another thing I want to mention is the ridiculous file size of this game. I really don't get why the base game itself is 45 gigs. And the PS4 version here has a 17 gig patch, which at the end of the day leads to the game being around 63 gigs on my console. And that's ridiculous for a remaster like this. Now, obviously it does include 2 games, it includes AC3 and Liberation. However, compared to like something like the Ezio trilogy, which has 3 games, all the DLCs, and that's only 38 gigs. Now, obviously AC3 is a much bigger game. However, is Liberation really that much of a bigger game than something like AC2? So like it's really ridiculous how big this game is, considering it is a remaster. The only remaster I can think of that's even comparable to this is Beyond Two Souls and Heavy Rain, which are both around 40 gigs a piece as well. But this is a ridiculous size for AC3. And to be honest, it took me like 4 hours to download the entire thing, which is kind of frustrating too because you actually had to download the entire thing before starting the game. Because if the entire thing didn't download yet, well, you could start the application after like a third of the way through. The actual games themselves wouldn't actually start. But overall, I gotta say, I do really like this collection. I think it's cool to be able to play AC3 and Liberation on modern day consoles with slight graphical improvements. Now, obviously the character models are downgraded here, but I do feel like that's something that they could probably fix in a patch. So I'm kind of hoping they do that at some point. But for me though, I don't think there's really ever a reason for me to return to the original PS3 game at this point. I think the PS4 version is pretty much better in almost every way. Again, character models aside. But I do feel like the improvements here are good enough to outweigh the negatives. So there we go. Those are my thoughts on Assassin's Creed 3 Remastered. Thank you for watching.
You're new.
Want to watch Meerkats without the ads?
Oh, am I an ad?
Get YouTube Premium. All YouTube, no interruptions.
Wait, where's this
Find
other
every
target?
drug fact in seconds with nursing's best-selling drug handbook.
Oh.
Alright guys, if you like your back with you a video. In this video, I'm talking about my experience playing through Kingdom Hearts 2.8 and Kingdom Hearts 3. This is kind of a sequel video to a video I did about a year ago, which I made immediately after I played all games on 1.5 to 2.5 collection. And I took a break after playing this game, so I finally came back to Kingdom Hearts here after picking up 2.8 and 3. a row. So let's just get this out of the way. There will be spoilers for every game or movie in the 2.8 collection, which includes Dream Drop Distance, 0.2 Fragmentary Passage, and Keep That Cover. And I also will talk spoilers about Kingdom Hearts 3 and the Remind DLC. So as I said, I did a video on 1.5 plus 2.5 already, where I came out of it being pretty mixed on the series as a whole. I didn't even finish Kingdom Hearts 1 before reaching the memories due to certain boss battles being super frustrating. And while I did enjoy my time in Kingdom Hearts 2 and Birth by Sleep, I did get burnt out on Kingdom Hearts after playing them. But every time I would look back on the series, I would have a massive amount of respect for the scale of the narrative it tries to tell. As convoluted as it is, I do have a lot of respect for the amount of foreshadowing and continuity between these games that were all released in like very different ways. But it wasn't until Black Friday of 2019 that I decided to finally pick up Kingdom Hearts 3. And at that point, I decided to go out of my way to pick up 2.8 as well. And I finally got around to playing them around the time of the release of the Remind DLC. And from that point on, I played all the games in a row. And now I'm finally ready to talk about them. So let's start it off with 2.8, starting with Dream Drop Distance, which, if you don't know, is a remake of a 3DS game. And despite it being a side game, I mean, it's probably the most important game to play in the series before playing Kingdom Hearts 3. Let's start off with the gameplay, though, which I mean is mostly what you would expect from a Kingdom Hearts game. Now, while I did have difficulties with certain boss battles in some of the games I played previously, this is actually a relatively easy experience here. I think the only time I died in the entire game was during the first Ansem fight towards the end of the game. And that was mostly due to a lack of focus. Like, I just, forgot to heal at one point and I ended up getting killed there. And that being said, there were annoying fights here and there, but nothing that I ever got really frustrated with. It was more so just taking a while to get the boss's health down or trying to even find the boss to begin with. Like, that sort of stuff was frustrating. But the actual difficulty of the battle itself, like trying not to die during these battles, wasn't that hard. I think a major reason for that is that I do think this gameplay style here is a lot easier due to the command deck system that it uses for its combat, which was used in Birth by Sleep. I don't remember it being as broken in Birth by Sleep. In this game, it's broken. I mean, it really is. Where here, what I did is I stacked all the cure magics and the fire magics. And I was able to just use the fire magics all in a row to injure the enemies. If I ever got damaged, I could just use cure. And instead of it using MP, what happens in this game is that they reload. So obviously you would have to wait a little bit of time before being able to use it again. But if you have like 3 cure spells, by the time you use the 3rd cure spell, the first one should be reloaded by that point. So there's never where I was that worried about health. And as I said, like to be killed, you have to be completely caught off guard. And again, stacking the fire spells, you just spam those at the beginning of the fight, do a lot of damage to your boss, wait for them to reload, and do the same thing again. Made a lot of the boss battles a lot more tolerable in the game, but also kind of just broke the game as a whole. Now, like the other side games, Dream Drop Distance does have its gimmicks as well. The first of which being the drop system, which was an interesting way to handle having 2 playable characters here, where you had to play as both Sora and Riku. But unlike in Birth by Sleep or Chain of Memories, where each character had their own storyline and you played that storyline one after the other, here in Dream Drop Distance, you play the 2 playthroughs concurrently. When you're playing as a character, you have a drop gauge that continuously goes down over time.
Are you fucking serious? Are you fucking
serious? I really like how the
serious?
system was handled, especially with how entwined the 2 storylines were. And I did like how when you switch characters, you were given bonuses for the other characters you use based on how many drop points you collected as the character you just finished playing. I really like that. Game also had this reality shift system, which it was fine. I mean, it's essentially a mini game that when you finish the mini game, it affects how the world is perceived, whether that be opening up a pathway that wasn't there before or destroying some enemies that you couldn't go any other way. What I didn't like about it was I didn't feel like it was super clear when you were supposed to use it. I mean, I feel like when you're doing it for the first time at least, you have no clue what you're really doing. It's like you just get to a point where you just don't know what to do, and then you just like hit the buttons for reality shift and says, oh, it works. This game does also introduce flow motion, which does become a prominent system in Kingdom Hearts 3, which allows for more interactivity with the environments, like running on rails or spinning on poles. But another massive inclusion in this game was the Dream Eater system, which seemed like Kingdom Hearts' version of like Personas or like Pokemon, where they would be the main enemies of the game, but they would also be your allies in the game, where once you kill them, you get recipes for them, and you can craft your own Dream Eaters to fight alongside you. The game also did have a replacement for gunny ship sections in the dives, which I hated just as much. I mean, they're all had these like different objectives, like killing enemies within time limit, or beating a boss, or getting like a certain amount of orbs. Like I just didn't find it fun. I mean, I hate gunny ship missions. I hate dives as well. The Disney worlds in this game felt very random. I mean, it felt like they were forced to pick source material that haven't been used previously, and it left them with a lot of scraps. Where outside Hunchback of Notre Dame and Fantasia, the worlds here were completely unexpected to me. I mean, we had Tron Legacy for some reason, even though we already had Tron in the previous games. Like they actually made a new world just for Tron Legacy. We had the 3 Musketeers with like Donald, Goofy, and Mickey. Like that was just weird. I mean, I don't know why that was there. We had this weird Pinocchio world that was like a theme park for Sora, but then like when he plays Riku, it's a remake of Monstro. Like that was weird. Which I also didn't love like the inconsistency between how like sometimes when you play Sora and Riku, when you switch between the characters, like these worlds would be completely different, but then sometimes they would be exactly the same. But that's just a minor complaint there. But let's talk about the narrative, which I found pretty strong, especially towards the end of the game. I mean, most of the game revolves around this Mark of Masteries exam, which I mean, to be honest, doesn't even matter. It really doesn't. And just like any other Kingdom Hearts game, obviously Disney World stories are pointless. I mean, they never affect anything either. But this game does set up Kingdom Hearts 3 more than any other previous game. I mean, it's the game that we finally learn about Xehanort's background and his true plan of like gathering the 7 Guardians of Light and 13 Seekers of Darkness. But something I did really like about this game, that something that I've had a problem with Kingdom Hearts as a whole, is I find it very tough to connect to the characters. I feel like this game really made me like Riku so much more, where you get so much more development in this game as the storyline becomes the main storyline of the endgame, where Sora gets consumed by darkness and Riku has to go and save him. Coming out of this game, I think Riku is probably my favorite character in the franchise. I didn't even mention the inclusion of characters from The World Ends With You, which did seem pretty pointless, as they do and get a good chunk of the screen time in Traverse Town, but they're never shown actually doing anything, and they don't really affect the plot too much anyway. Overall, I did have a pretty good experience with Dream Drop Distance. I mean, I will admit that I do think the mid-game dragged on a little bit. I did find it kind of redundant how the final few boss battles were once again fighting Ansem and Xemnas again, but I did like what they did narratively here. I mean, they put the final pieces that were needed to move on to Kingdom Hearts 3, allowing us to learn more about Xehanort, who, despite being the main antagonist of the entire series at this point, we know almost nothing about him. So because of that, I came out of this game really excited getting around to play Kingdom Hearts 3. But I had to play one more game before I got to that game, and that was 0.2, a Fragmentary Passage, which was meant to be a teaser for Kingdom Hearts 3. It was the original game built for this 2.8 collection, and it tells us the story of Aqua's time while she was in the Realm of Darkness after the true ending of Birth by Sleep. And 0.2 here is fine. I mean, it's what you would expect from a teaser. It's really short. I finished it in about an hour and a half, which is around the same length that would take to complete one world in any main series game. And the game was split into 4 different levels that had inspirations from locations from Birth by Sleep, and I thought that was a really cool callback. Obviously, we see more of Aqua, who I love as a character. She might be my favorite character in all of Kingdom Hearts. We got its Riku. But something else I did like about this game was how they tied in this game's narrative to Kingdom Hearts 1, where Mickey encounters Aqua right before Cage 1's ending, showing that Aqua sacrificed herself to save Riku. And I like that world building there, that interconnectivity there. However, I find it really ridiculous how they explain why Mickey didn't have any armor on in Cage 1, where he gets it like stripped off of him by darkness, like it's served up. Like it's such a blatant retcon. I might this entire DLC is a retcon, but it's like that was like the most ridiculous retcon to me. But I did like how they put this game together. Obviously, the game ends with the beginning of Game 3, which I do find strange. It's literally the exact same cutscene. I mean, obviously it would be exciting if I was playing this at the time that 2.8 came out, but playing this now where I just moved on to Kingdom Hearts 3 really afterwards, it's kind of meh. But overall, I did enjoy 0.2 for what it is. I mean, there's just much to say about it because it is so short. Now let's move on to the movie that was included on 2.8, which is Key Back Cover, which I did start watching while playing Dream Drop Distance, but watched it over the course of a few days, watching about like 20 minutes at a time. It's not even that long either. I mean, I think it's only like a little bit over an hour long, but that cover here is the tie-in film to a mobile game that took place during the Keyblade War, years before the beginning of the actual series. And it shows the events from the perspective of the foretellers, the Keyblade masters that served under the Master of Masters who disappeared. And before he does, he gives each of the foretellers a role, and a lot of the movie focuses on the foretellers learning what their role is, and also them trying to find a traitor. But I did find it really weird how we never actually learn who the traitor is. Obviously we will in the future Kingdom Hearts, I'm sure. It's obviously storylines being set up for the future, but from a pure like movie standpoint, like as a piece of media, I do find it strange how they start a story, but they don't really end it. Like this movie doesn't have a set beginning, middle, end. It's more so like beginning, the start, the middle, and then just cuts off. So while I did really like how this film really expanded the lore of the franchise, with the foretellers obviously going to be a prominent feature in the next saga of Kingdom Hearts, I did wish it was a more cohesive narrative on its own right. But again, as a piece of lore in Kingdom Hearts, it is really great. But that's everything from 2.8. Obviously I got that done and I was ready to move on to Kingdom Hearts 3. And I will admit that I was spoiled on certain major plot points by the time I played it, but I enjoyed the game nonetheless. I mean, it's not perfect. I know a lot of people were so disappointed with this game. I mean, the fan community for the game, from my understanding, is very mixed, and I can definitely understand why. I mean, I can understand why this was a disappointment after 14 years of waiting since KH2. But as a newer Kingdom Hearts fan, someone that just played the games over the course of last year, as a conclusion to the saga, I do like it here. I mean, I did really enjoy it. I mean, I do question the game structure, but we'll talk about that later. But overall, I enjoyed the game. Let's start off with the gameplay, though, which, as you would expect, is very similar to previous games. I mean, it feels like a steady evolution of this.
Damn, this is cutscenes in this are really nice looking.
We leave offerings at the Guardian Tree, asking it to protect the ones we love. Taro left this for the children. He must have been so scared when he lost them. Many of the offerings here were placed by the first village leaders. Skilled hunters who use spirit energy to create powerful weapons. I'm sure the Guardian Tree won't mind if we use them to help Taro.
Okay. So I'm responding to text right now. Okay. Shit.
Johnny,
God damn it.
if we're going to survive,
Actually, I
I
think
think
Guy
we should
did
join a stronger
fucking
alliance.
Metro video.
Come on, Brent, we're legends! Players should be
I wanna
begging to
rewatch
join
that,
us. Wait.
Wait, what the fuck
Attention
is
noobs! This is for...
Let's start off the gameplay, though, which, as you would expect, is very similar to previous games. I mean, it feels like a steady evolution of the systems from KH2, adding in systems from other games like Birth by Sleep and Dream Drop Distance as well. We got stuff like the shot lock system, we got flow motion, which obviously came a lot of focus on free running, where Sora can just run up cliffs now in buildings. Something new here was the attraction flow attacks, which use like Disney park rides as inspiration, which I did find kind of weird. I mean, I also didn't love that they were pretty much completely RNG on which ones you would get, but I thought they added a new dynamic to the gameplay, and overall they were just fine. And the same thing goes for like the team up attacks and also the special keyblade attacks, where in this game it seemed like they were completely up to RNG which one would appear. And because I felt like there was a lot less agency from the player during combat, and I can understand why people would find that disappointing, but I personally really enjoyed the combat in this game probably more than any other game in the franchise. And that being said, it was also probably the easiest combat in the franchise, which is also another factor. I'm someone that plays games for the experience, for the narrative, not really for the difficulty. I mean, I'm someone that I usually play games either on easy or normal. I don't go for hard difficulties unless it's a game that I'm really, really into. Unless it's like my second or third playthrough of a game. But like considering I can get through the ends of playing Kingdom Hearts 1 and also the Vex and Fight and Reaching Memories, I do play the Kingdom Hearts games on easiest difficulty. But for me, this was definitely the easiest game to finish out of the entire bunch. Where coming into the end game, despite being underleveled, I believe you're supposed to be somewhere in the range of like level 42 or something. I was level 39. I never died at any of the bosses. And for me, that's a positive. I can understand why people find that to be a negative. I know why people wanted the final Xehanort fight to be brutally difficult, but it's like, for me, I'm fine with the way it is. That's like about the Disney worlds, which just like most other Kingdom Hearts games, they're my least favorite parts. I mean, I know a lot of people love the Disney aspect, and for me, I don't care about it. And most of them bring nothing to the overall narrative, and while some of them do have some pretty cool cool set pieces, especially in this game, I feel like they were just halting me from experiencing the main reason I was excited for this game, which was because this was the conclusion to the Xehanort saga. But despite this, I did enjoy some of the worlds here. I mean, Toy Box is one I really enjoyed from a level design standpoint of taking place all within a toy store. You going from department to department to fight different types of Heartless. The Kingdom of Corona was probably my favorite from a character perspective, and again, the cutscenes in this portion of the game were just simply beautiful. I mean, they look like they were right out of a Pixar film. Metropolis was the kind of dull world to me, in my opinion. I mean, it was mostly a linear section of the game, and I wasn't a big fan of how the game was designed there. Arendelle was just boring. I mean, I never cared for Frozen as a whole, and also having to deal with Olaf was just really annoying. The Caribbean was probably where I was the most impressed from a gameplay standpoint, where to see them build this entire naval combat system just for this little section of the game was very impressive to me. But narratively, I thought this one was probably the most boring of the bunch. San Francisco was a really weird structured level as well. I did think it was fun to fly around the city, but outside of that, I didn't really care for what was going on there either. I don't know, I even forgot about Olympus. I mean, Olympus was fine. I mean, while it was a cool tutorial, I did find most of the level kind of boring. I mean, there was some fun, like running up cliffs and sliding through fires and all that sort of stuff. That was fine. I was kind of underwhelmed though by the lack of Radiant Garden or Destiny Island gameplay, as they were only shown in cutscenes, which was kind of weird considering how important they are to the overall series. To have them in this game but just not playable was a weird choice to me. And that was about the narrative, which conceptually I found brilliant. I mean, this is essentially the Avengers for the Kingdom Hearts franchise, where all these groups that we've seen together in previous games, the main series trio, the Birth by Sleep trio, and the 358 over 2 Days trio, those characters and storylines finally come together here. But not just those, we also get threads from things like Recoded and Union Key, which was surprising to me. But the biggest flaw to me is that nothing of importance happens until after you finish the Disney World. Like, it's so strange how we have, like, what, 3/4 of the game and, like, nothing happens in the main narrative. But in the back fourth of the game, everything happens. I mean, you spend the first 3/4 looking for the power of waking, which is this all-powerful power that just seemed like it was made up solely as a plot device. And we never really get the full rules of what this power is, how Sora even eventually got it back, all that sort of stuff. Like, it's just kind of dumb. And that made the first, like, 20 hours of the game feel kind of underwhelming. When the main reason I was playing the game was for really what happened in the last, like, 5-ish hours. And from the point you leave San Francisco on, it's fantastic. I mean, all the stuff with Aqua is probably my favorite content in the entire game, where Aqua wakes up in the realm of light. Like, that was such a great scene. And then we go from that immediately to the land departure and Awakening Ventus. That was fantastic as well. I love how we got, like, a Mass Effect-esque, like, final day sequence where all the characters are interacting the day before the final battle. That was really fun. And then we get to the Keyblade Graveyard, where I didn't love the prolonged start of it, where the opening scenes were kind of fine, and I liked the final world as a whole, but after I felt like the Lynch stuff was just kind of boring to have to fight him, like, 7 times over and over again. It's really annoying. That really ruined the pacing there. Having to watch the opening scene again was just kind of weird. But obviously, once we get to the fight between the 7 Guardians of Light and the 13 Seekers of Darkness, it's fantastic again. It's fantastic from that point on. I love all these fights, and the character interactions there were fantastic. Though I didn't love how right after you kill a certain enemy, you would get the cutscene right away. It just seemed dumb logically, because essentially you're saying, so other guy that you're fighting is just like standing there waiting, saying, oh yeah, I'm gonna let you have that conversation there. It's just kind of ridiculous. Again, there were great scenes within this. I mean, Luxor's final words were really fun, and you can definitely tell that's setting up a storyline in the future as well. The reunion of both the Birth by Sleep trio and the 358 over 2 Days trio, that was really great, really heartwarming. But I didn't love how Sora was involved in every fight. I mean, obviously you kind of had to have it that way from a gameplay standpoint, as you would want all the stuff that you've built up to this point to be worth it by having Sora, the character that you've leveled up and everything, be involved in all these fights. But I thought narratively, it just made Sora too important. Like, I don't love the aspect of, like, Sora needed to be at all these spots at the moments that all these enemies were defeated. I think it would have been a lot better if you were playing as, like, Riku for that Riku fight, playing as Mickey for when he fights his stuff, playing as Aqua during the fight with Xehanort, like that sort of stuff. I mean, I don't love the fact that Sora was the playable character for all this. And they kind of fix it for Remind, but we'll talk about that a bit later. After that, we get Xehanort killing Kairi, and I really want to like Kairi. I feel like Kairi is the type of character that you should be liking in the series, but it just feels like Nomura doesn't want to actually make her likable. I mean, she just easily gets captured by Xemnas, and then just gets killed just like that. We do get the final boss battle with Xehanort in Scala ad Calium, or whatever it was called, which is a really nice, like, looking world. I really like that area. But I did find the final Xehanort fight to be kind of underwhelming, where I found the boss with Xemnas and some young Xehanort to be a much better boss battle. I also didn't like how they had to redeem Xehanort at the end there. Now, I'm pretty sure this is to set up a storyline for the future. And also, I mean, like, normally I am a fan of complex villains. I don't love it when people are purely evil or purely good in a narrative. I feel like that's lazy writing. But for them to not even set this up and then throw it in at the last second, I feel like it's even lazier writing. Though again, I do think this is setting up storylines for future Kingdom Hearts games. And we end the game with Sora using the power of waking to revive Kairi, but then loses himself in the process. And I thought that was a great ending. That shot of him fading away is fantastic. I think such a great way to end this entry in the series, and a great way to lead into Remind, which I'll talk about in a bit. But we also get a post-credit scene, which I absolutely adored because it might be one of my favorite scenes in the entire series, where we have the Lushu reveal, where Lushu turns out to be Zigbar, which just came out of left field, but also just makes perfect sense. I think that's like the perfect sort of thing. I mean, really, in reality, you can tell this was not the plan when Zigbar was initially introduced, but when they created the concept of Lushu, like, everything just fit there. And that's something I do find very impressive narratively. Also, this sets up the future fight against the Foretellers, which obviously is going to be the next saga in the Kingdom Hearts franchise. So overall, I feel like Kingdom Hearts 3 has some of the highest highs in the entire franchise to me. I mean, I really enjoyed the base gameplay. I think it has some of the best narrative moments in the entire franchise. Again, most of that last few hours stretch being everything I wanted from Kingdom Hearts from the very beginning. So while I did question some decisions that were made with the lack of importance in the first, like, 20 hours of the game, and what seemed like some cutbacks in terms of some important worlds like the Destiny Islands and Radiant Garden, I still did love my experience with this game, quite possibly more than any other game in the series. But before we end here, I do want to at least talk about Remind, which, for full disclosure here, I did not play myself. I did end up watching a Let's Play of it instead, as, to be honest, I didn't want to spend $30 on it. I mean, it is a pretty short DLC that is mostly a retread of the ending of Kingdom Hearts 3, but also the inclusion of brutal boss battles that, again, if you can't tell by the way I've talked about so far, not really my thing. But I do think there's some interesting story stuff to talk about here, where we did get 3 different scenarios with the main Remind story, which was mostly a repeat of the Keyblade Graveyard stuff from KH3, which I found pretty pointless. I mean, we did get more scenes, and we did also get to see how Sora did rescue Kairi, which obviously involved him traveling back in time and refighting organization, which again, they did allow you to play as these other characters this time, which I thought that was good, but for the most part, it's kind of pointless. There was some new content that was pretty strong, like the Luxord and Zigbar conversation, which was great. Seeing young Xehanort meet the Master Masters was really fun. I did like how this pretty much tied up the loose ends with the Kingdom Hearts 3 ending. I just wish this entire DLC was new content instead of the middle section being stuff we've already seen. Now for the Limit Cut episode, which I did like how we got to see what happened after Sora's appearance. It was nice to see the Final Fantasy characters back, though they were barely there. Again, the boss battles that were involved here, not really my thing, but I did love the cutscene that you get at the end of it, where it sets up the future game of Riku finding Sora. Then we also get the secret ending, which is even more interesting to me, where we see Sora meeting up with Yozora from the Verum Rex game within the Toy Box world of Kingdom Hearts 3. And the entire storyline here builds up so many possibilities that really intrigued me about the future of the franchise. So overall, I do love the setup that they did here with Remind, even though I personally don't feel like its gameplay was enough for me to actually buy it for myself. So there you go, I'm finally caught up on Kingdom Hearts, kind of. But I've thought through every piece of media that I have played or watched in the series. I'm definitely coming out of this experience pretty high on Kingdom Hearts at this point as a franchise, much higher than I was when I made the 1.5 plus 2.5 video. I'm considering doing a series ranking of these games at some point down the road, so that might be fun at some point. And also I'd like to do a video where I talk about the future of the franchise. I think that would be fun as well. But for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.
Actually, I wanna watch more Metro. How the fuck do they do an 8-minute Metro video?
Alright guys, Bill, I'm here back with a new video. In this video, I'll be talking about my thoughts on Metro Exodus 1 year after the game's initial release. And this is also around the 1 year anniversary when I originally played the first 2 games in the Metro series. And I did a review of that on my channel a year ago, so why not talk about Metro Exodus now? So essentially, here are my really late thoughts on the 3rd game in the Metro series. I really enjoyed my experience with the first 2 games in the series, and that caused me to have really high expectations for Exodus. But when Exodus came out, I just felt very underwhelmed. What I really loved from the first 2 Metro games was that it was a narrative-focused first-person shooter, which, I mean, the FPS genre as a whole is something I've never particularly cared for. But for games like Metro and Bioshock, I'm willing to overlook my issues with the genre and enjoy those games for their narratives. But for me, Metro Exodus just felt like it took the Metro series and mixed it in with a very generic open-world shooter. And I got a lot more like Far Cry vibes from this game, and that's not what I wanted from a Metro game. I'm not saying this is a bad game, I'm just saying it isn't exactly what I wanted. So let's talk about the gameplay, which for the most part is similar to the previous Metro games. It's a first-person shooter with survival horror elements. The gas mask system returns here, though it isn't utilized nearly as much as in the previous games, as not everywhere on the surface requires it in this game. And while playing this game, I never really had an issue with filters, which is something I had a lot of issues with in Metro 2033, and that was actually one of my major complaints with that game. But I will say I did play this game on easy, so that's obviously probably a major factor there. But another reason for it is that you now have the ability to craft anywhere, and while the things that you can craft is limited compared to what you can do at a workbench, filters and medkits are things that you can craft at any point, which is something that did make the system a little bit less frustrating. But this crafting system does completely replace the shops and currency system that was in place for the first 2 games. I didn't really spend that much time upgrading my weapons in this game. A lot of that came from me just finding upgraded weapons all the time from just looting enemies. But again, I don't know if that's because I played on easy or what, but for me it was just super easy to find like fully upgraded weapons all the time. And speaking of looting, the open world aspect of this game, along with the crafting system, makes looting really important in this game, where you have to find materials to craft really basic supplies like medkits and filters, as I mentioned earlier, which are very rare to find in the actual open world. Though you can also craft things like ammo and you can clean your weapons with these materials as well. I did find that this game had a lot more focus on stealth, and I mostly ignored it. I mean, I just ran into combat, which is another factor of again playing on easy, but I just find that the most fun way to play this game. But there is one chapter in the Taiga where you do spend the entire time on your own, and you can tell the game wants you to play it in a very stealthy fashion. But again, I really just didn't have the patience for it. The type of weapons in this game are mostly the same for the previous games, but I did find myself using things like throwing knives and Molotov cocktails a bit more often than I normally would, with the Molotovs actually being very helpful during the boss battles in the game. As I mentioned before, a good chunk of this game's chapters comprise of individual open world, unlike the previous games, which had a very linear style of gameplay outside of the camps and underground cities. And through this, you spend a good chunk of time on the surface, which was the most terrifying part of the original games, as you always had fears of like humans attacking you or you running out of filters. But in this game, it's the complete opposite, where the underground sections were filled with mutant spiders and mostly required the use of filters, and even sometimes I got lost, and it just really wasn't a fun section in this game. The open worlds, though, are pretty big, to the point where they added vehicles to games, like boats and cars, and I didn't control great. I really didn't like using them. Driving the cars and everything felt very loose. Driving the boat was very clunky as it would get stuck on almost everything. It was just annoying. I really didn't like it. Now let's talk about the story, which is still told in a similar way to the previous games, where they use very minimal cutscenes, and RTM is still a silent protagonist that you only hear in the loading screens as he sets up each chapter. And I found the narrative of this game to be the weakest in the series. Well, I think the premise is fantastic of it, like turning out that life does exist outside Moscow, and you leave the metro and search for a new home. But in execution, it made a lot of the chapters feel episodic, where they made most of these stories contained within each chapter and had very little effect on the overall narrative of the game, with the exception of maybe like a member joining or leaving the crew. This game does completely drop the Dark One storyline, which was a major factor in the first 2 games, and really my favorite part of those first 2 games is narratives. But I mean, Last Light did kind of finish up that story, so I do understand why they're not involved in this game, but it did make this narrative a lot less interesting to me. The morality system from the previous games does return, but to be honest, I didn't pay attention to it. I didn't really in the previous games either, but I did end up getting the bad ending because of that, which I actually didn't mind as an ending, to be honest. I think the best possible ending would be like mixing portions of the good ending with the bad ending. I'm not saying that they were bad, just like a little bit better. Character-wise, you definitely get to know the characters a lot better in this game than the previous ones, where there are chapters in this game that are named after the respective season that take place in between the major chapters, and these are mostly just exploration sections on the train, where you can interact and observe the members of the crew, and steadily get to see their relationships progress. Finally, let's talk about the major chapters of the game. The opening of Moscow was a mostly linear section of the game, and did a really good job of introducing the premise of the game, which, as I said, was a pretty strong concept. The Volga was the first open world section, and I didn't really care for it. It's actually what made me stop playing the game the first time I played it. I really thought this section really dragged on. I didn't care for the direction that the game was taking, so I initially stopped playing here until obviously I decided to make this video and decided to give it another shot. But in retrospect, this is probably the open world chapter that brings the most into the narrative. Downtown was another linear level, which felt more in line with the previous games, where you're infiltrating a enemy base. It was a much better level 4 in my opinion. The Caspian was a massive desert open world, and I found this section kind of boring, and it involved a lot of driving that was pretty clunky. There was a lot of cliffs that you fall off of, or have to find a way around. It also was just not a point football area, so I know I really didn't like this chapter. And I had similar issues with the Taiga as well, which is just like open world, that you have the rope with very meager supplies, and you have very little narrative progression. So for me, that dragged on as well. But for the final level, in Dead City, I really loved it. I loved it in the narrative in the chapter. This is probably the most terrified about the entire game. I mean, you were alone for a good chunk of it. You were in underground tunnels, and having the base just sneak around really strong enemies, which made it feel more in line with the previous Metro games. So for me, this is probably my favorite section of the entire game. So those are pretty much my thoughts on Metro Exodus. Again, I like this game as a whole, but I found it the underdog part of the Metro series, due to its game structure and the rich story. My reviews for the first game, I gave Metro 2033 8 out of 10, and Last Light 9 out of 10. I don't think this game is nearly to the caliber of Last Light. I do think it's somewhat close to 2033, and I think because that, I would give it a score of probably 8 out of 10. So while I would consider some of the series as a whole, when a 4th Metro game comes out, which supposedly they are working on, I'm still interested in continuing on with the series. Even though again, gameplay-wise, it isn't exactly what I want, I do feel like narratively there could be some interesting stuff to come. So that is my review for Metro Exodus 1 year later. Thank you for watching.
Yeah, let's make this.
Back with a new video. In this video, I'll be ranking every game in the
Let's do. I want to hear how positive I was on Shenmue at the time.
Alright guys, welcome back to a new video. In this video, I'll be giving my spoiler-filled thoughts on Shenmue 3, about 3 months after its initial release, and about 1 year after I initially played the first 2 games, and did a video about them on the channel. And I really love Shenmue 1 and 2. They're 2 games I have a massive amount of respect for, both in terms of what they did for the open world genre, and also for its really ambitious narrative, and how long it's been since Shenmue 2, which originally came out 2001, I was unsure about how Shenmue 3 would play in a more modern day. And the reception for this game has been extremely mixed, even from those hardcore fans. And while I have it as well, I'm certainly more positive on it than negative. Shenmue 3 is just more Shenmue. I mean, it doesn't improve on much from Shenmue 2, but it still gives you the same tone and style of gameplay that you would expect. But again, the previous game came out 18 years prior, and for the gameplay to be exactly the same, after all this time, despite the open world genre having evolved so much, even over the last 5 years, with games like The Witcher 3 and Red Dead Redemption 2, Shenmue just feels extremely outdated. And to me, that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. Now, I will talk about the story stuff more so towards the end of the video, but now let's talk about the gameplay first. So, again, the gameplay is similar to that of the previous games. The open world is filled with shops and NPCs that you can interact with, and I feel like the shops had a more important role in this game than the previous one, but I feel like the NPCs and their abilities in this game were reduced from Shenmue 2, where in Shenmue 2 you could interact with pretty much anybody in the city, and they would even take you where you needed to go. But in this game, it feels like a good chunk of the people walking down the streets weren't interactable, and while you do meet some colorful characters through these conversations, I didn't find the NPCs as helpful in the game as well. But as I mentioned, the shops are probably more important than they are in previous games, and for better or worse, where something I should mention is that the health system in this game functions very differently from previous games, where running around, even in the open world, causes you to lose health, and if you end up in combat, that health carries over to the combat section. But you can increase your health by using food or medicine, which you can buy in shops. It also requires money, again, in a similar way to how you got in Shenmue 2, which is gambling and part-time jobs, and I found a lot of these systems really annoying, to be honest. I didn't love how long it took to make money in Shenmue 2, and it sucks even more in this game where there are multiple story points, you need a lot of money before you're able to continue on in the story. So essentially, it just makes you do these things over and over and over again, it just gets really tedious. I mean, you can get part-time jobs in this game, like wood chopping, which is, I mean, it's very redundant, obviously, and also the classic forklift driving, it's cool to see a turn, like, all that. But not fun, and like, well, there are fortune tellers that give you your lucky number or color keys, those increase your odds by actually gambling, but it's not 100% guaranteed. The game also saw the return of quick time events, which were just as annoying as they were in the original game, but luckily the checkpoints are right at the beginning of each sequence, so it isn't that bad. The game does have a solid amount of combat in it as well, which is okay. Yeah, I don't feel like it did anything to improve it here. It might even be a downgrade where your attacks never really felt too impactful. I could spend most of my time just button mashing. It got me through up until the red snakes fight, like towards the end of the game. And it's at that point that I realized that the game really makes you grind, where my training, both through sparring and through the endurance mini games, really helped you out in combat. Just through maxing out my endurance, I was able to finish the game without much difficulty from that point on. Then I'll talk about the locations in the game, which are Bailu Village and Niawu, which graphically both look nice. I mean, while the character models in the game and the animations are extremely janky, the environments are mostly really nice to look at. And it was cool to see a mostly load-time-free open world, unlike the previous two games. Though there are points where you're forced to walk, where you very clearly tell the game is loading in the background during that time, especially in Niawu. There's like multiple sections in Niawu where this happened. I guess it is what it is. I do feel like Bailu Village was a better location for me, though. Despite it being smaller, I felt like the level design was slightly better, and also the characters within Bailu were a lot more interesting to me. But speaking of these characters, they're so poorly acted, the writing's still really terrible. But I mean, I guess that's kind of the charm that you expect from Shenmue at this point. Something I found really cool in Niawu was that you were actually allowed to use your phone at the hotel to call an array of characters from previous games. I thought this was a pretty nice Easter egg for them to put into the game, even though most of them weren't really voiced by their original voice actors, and none of them had any impact on the overall game. Now let's talk about the main story itself, which from what I gather is overwhelmingly looked at as disappointment. And I do partially agree, though we get some really great moments within this game. We start off right after where Shenmue 2 left off, where we're in the cave with Shenhua, and the game pretty much revolves around finding Shenhua's father. And while that initial premise is fine, nothing actually comes of that, which I really found strange. And then when we actually get to have a real conversation with him at the very revealed to the end, it was just really weird to me. But I will say I really liked Ryo's relationship with Shenhua. I really liked the first half of the game, those sections where every night you just talk to Shenhua, have these conversations, talk to her about the current events, get her reactions. After learning about Ryo's life and things he's been through, we learn more about her. I really liked those conversations. But I feel like her importance significantly decreases in the second half of the game, where you can still have nightly conversations, but pretty much all of them are revolved around what Ryo did that specific day. And on days where Ryo doesn't even do anything, it just feels like a copy and paste sort of thing. So I found that to be kind of disappointing. Ren is also in this game. I found his appearance in this game to be really strange, where he shows up for the first time like over halfway through the game. The game makes like no deal of it. It's like they just kind of brush it to the side. And he does play a major factor at the end of the game. But his like first appearance is just kind of nothing. I mean, he's the first character outside of Ryo and Shenhua, and Chai, I guess, to appear from a previous game in this game. But again, like they just do nothing with him until the end of the game. And while he is fantastic in the old castle section of the game, but yeah, it takes a while to get to that point. I also didn't love the game's pacing either. I felt like everything important to the overall narrative was really rushed, while the rest of the game was really bogged down by filler in order to make the game longer, by like forcing you to learn like martial arts moves. And to do that, you would need a ridiculous amount of money beforehand, and that forced you to gamble or do part-time jobs. And this really ruined the pacing of the story, where you can spend hours just trying to get money, all to get to the next story point. But at the same time, doing a pretty short game if those elements weren't there. And I think that's a major factor of Suzuki working with a much smaller team this time. It's really clear that this is an indie game. And I feel like that's a major reason for a lot of Shenmue 3 shortcomings. I understand why a lot of fans were underwhelmed by the story, as the narrative doesn't really move forward too much. I mean, the Bailu Village section really focuses on your relationship with Shenhua. It doesn't really do much else for the narrative as a whole until the very end, where you do learn a bit more about Ryo and Lendy's fathers, which gets reiterated at the end of the game when touched upon anyway. But you also learn a bit about the origin of the mirrors. The Niawu section of the game was even drier in terms of important content. I mean, this section did introduce Niao Sun, who seems to be an important character in the series, obviously being one of the leaders of the Chiyu Men, and obviously she has a major factor in the old castle section of the game as well, which is probably my favorite section of the entire game. Well, yeah, I do wish they did a bit more here. I did enjoy what we got, though it would have been cool to see another big open world like how it was supposedly originally supposed to be. I thought it was a pretty solid set piece in my eyes. The combat was mostly easy by the point I got to it, but it was just fun to one-hit kill a lot of these random soldiers and eventually get the Land E. And I thought the fight between Ryo and Land E, even though it only lasted for a few seconds, I thought it was a really fun moment. To actually get into gameplay and fight him and not even being able to damage him. I just thought that was a good ending point for this game, as it has Ryo fighting the ultimate opponent and making it very clear that he's just not ready yet. Also, in this ending, we have Niao Sun betraying Land E, and I feel like this could be a pretty interesting storyline in a future game. And at the end of the game, we do learn slightly more from Juan, even though it's a lot of just repeating information, a lot more about Landy's father and the mirrors, and how Landy was raised by the Chief Men and the Cliff Temple, with the game ending with Ryo, Shenhua, and Ren walking along the Great Wall of China. So I did come into this ending knowing that people were underwhelmed by it, and to be honest, I didn't hate it. I do think it's dumb that Rio doesn't get more information from Juan, but outside of that, I do think it is a pretty solid way to end this entry of the series. Now, I get why people wanted more after an 18-year wait. I know why people want Shenmue 3 to be the last one in the series, but I have a lot of respect that Yu Suzuki stuck to his guns and is trying to tell the story the way that he wants to, even though it could potentially lead to it never being finished. I think that might be it. So, I mean, overall, I did actually really enjoy my experience with Shenmue 3. There are a lot of annoying bits, a lot of things that just haven't aged well, some disappointments with the narrative, but overall, I just still really enjoyed it. I mean, it's more Shenmue. It still has the same charm that it had. It still has the same basic gameplay that it had. It's still continuing the story that it had, even though, again, minimally, but still continuing that story. And I do feel like I have a lot of investment in it at this point. So my original review of the first two games, I gave Shenmue 1 is a 1.5 out of 10. I gave Shenmue 2 an 8.5.
I thought it was gonna be boss. So let's go boss real quick.
I wouldn't mind doing a speculation video on the future Shenmue.
I guess listen to this one. I still can't believe I did this video.
From Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Now, these were the free DLC missions that were released after the initial release of the game. Essentially, they were just things to get people to come back to Odyssey. And now that all of them are out, I can finally make this video. The question is, why am I making this video? I don't know. Spoiler alert, they're good. I know it's bad. I don't feel like they're well-made, like the best ones. They're still mediocre side quests. I actually did go ahead and play all the ones before making this video, and I don't know if my mind is why I'm not telling that all those things. So, here we go. I did debate over doing a video or doing a ranking video. Let's do it. We're doing a ranking video. It's really arbitrary, but who cares? Let's go. Number 12, I have Divine Intervention, and this just sucks. I mean, it really has no real narrative. I wish especially by the spent a lot of these missions riding on their horse, riding the boat. It's just so boring. And all like, I hate it. Where's my play? I hate it on the replay. Now at number 11, I have Image of Safety, and even after having just replayed this, I have very little memory of it. I mean, essentially the quest line where how about the priest in this small village? Again, it's pretty boring, and there's nothing interesting in narrative or gameplay-wise. I think there's a single thing about the names of the characters here. So you'll spend most of your time going from random island to island in the middle of nowhere, so it's not the very bottom. Number 10, I have The Poet's Legacy, which I can at least say I have
really?
and I'm starting to tell you a narrative here that has a clear beginning and ending, which is better than the previous two. However, gameplay-wise, these missions are really annoying, where again, there's a lot of fetch quests, with some of these things that you gotta find being pretty hard to find, even within their own exploration zones, and to be honest, I did get stuck. I did run around circles for probably around 5 minutes trying to find these things. So, again, not my favorite mission in the world, so yeah, it ranks here at number 10. At number 9, I have Daughters of Walalia, whatever. Which again, at least tells the story. Mine is a very generic one, similar to that, like Seven Samurai, where Cassandra or Miss Gilda, I always play Cassandra, but whatever. Helps out the tribe and trains some of the members and leads the fight against the raiders. Again, it's something. Not good though. But like Poet's Legacy, there are a few annoying fetch quests, and while the characters didn't stand out as much as Poet's Legacy, I didn't have as bad of a time with the missions
So
themselves.
one's
So
it.
while I don't particularly like this one, I did put it in one spot.
Continue on later. Yeah, thanks for watching.
That is Socrates' trial, which is all around a really forgettable mission. I don't think there's anything that bad here, but nothing